Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here, my next Avatar weekly discussion topic video, and this one is going to be the start of a new series which is kind of following on from the video from last time out, where I went through my basically reasons for my power rankings for the best non-benders in Avatar. So this is going to be the start of a series as I try to go through and find out the best benders in Avatar. The reason it's going to be a series is because there are so many more benders, there are so many more good benders, it's so much more difficult to figure out not just who are the best benders full stop, but who are the best benders within each element. So I'm going to have to split this up into categories basically. So this first video I'm going to basically be doing the list for rankings for airbenders and waterbenders. The second video will probably be just firebending on its own. Then we will do earthbending, and we'll finish off with basically talking about where the avatars fit in, plus the final top 10, 20 list of benders full stop, depending on how many I want to do when I get to doing that video. So it's going to be a long-ish series, but I'll try to get these videos out as regularly as possible. Yeah, in terms of rules, the only thing I'm really kind of keeping in mind here is that when it comes to talking about the avatars, avatar state is not included. Because for me, if we include the avatar state, the list is just the avatars and then the 2 or 3 most powerful benders in the top 10. That's basically it. That there's no point in doing this discussion if we're going to include the avatars with their avatar state. So for the sake of this discussion, we're just going to be treating the avatars as the avatar state is banned and just judging them as benders of 4 elements and how that stacks up against benders of just 1 element and so on. I'm going to do my best to basically just analyze the characters as we see them within the show, and only very rarely touch on if characters I feel have the potential when they're older or in their prime, or maybe if it's an old character, if we revert them back towards where they were in their prime. I'm only really going to do that in very specific situations if I feel that where a character isn't totally representative of where they could be just based on the strength of their character and stuff like that. For the most part, I'm going to stick to what is presented within the show, and that's that sort of thing. So we'll jump straight into, for me, what I think is probably the easiest one to figure out in terms of our trying to get our kind of end short list of our top 5 waterbenders. Now, I'm going to be primarily looking for a top 5, but I'm going to include basically the next couple, just in case by the time I get to making the list at the end, the list actually needs more than 5 of 1 element, because that element happens to have a bunch of really powerful benders. So I'm going to roughly try and order the list I have and not just eliminate everyone. So here's my short list of waterbenders. Yakone, PACU, Minghua, Amon, or Noatok, whoever you want to refer to him as, Unalaq, Tonraq, Tarlok, Eska, Desna, Kaeya, Katara, Tano, and Hugh. So, not every waterbender from the show, not every named waterbender. Do and Tho, I just say Hugh because I think he's more notable for his powers, but but with him, and I think a couple of the other characters, I think they drop off the list very quickly. They're not going to be near the end top 10, 20 benders list, but they just deserve to be mentioned here as, notable. Plant bending, that's his skill. He's powerful in his own way, but he can be countered. Bit overly specific. So we'll just drop Hugh off the list at this point in time. We've mentioned him. He's fine. Cool. Tano also drops off at this point. He is, I think, a good waterbender, but we only see him really within pro bending. And as skilled as I think he is, I don't think he is anywhere near the list. So I'm just going to mention him here and we'll move on. Next, I think the next people to drop off are Eska and Desna. Again, I think their skill, I would consider them master waterbenders, whereas I wouldn't necessarily refer to Tano as a master waterbender, but a notable one. I think these two are masters, but I don't see anything massively special about them. I think together, as like a pair fighting people, they're excellent because they're twins and they seem to have this kind of psychic connection, more so than like you would expect maybe from twin characters. I think they just work exceptionally well together. On their own, as we're primarily judging this as individual one-on-one fights when comparing characters, I don't think they stand out massively. They are good. I think they beat the majority of just random benders of most elements. But we're talking about the best of the best here, and I don't think Eska and Desna are that. So I'll mention them here as being very, very, very solid waterbenders, but I think they drop off the list at this point in time. I think the next person to fall off the list is Kaeya. I think Kaeya is very good, but I really don't think she's anywhere close to basically where her mother gets to. I think she is more focused on waterbending in terms of its healing arts and stuff like that. Not to say she doesn't have any combat ability, I think she does. Part of that may just be because we only really see Kaeya when she's kind of much older and kind of past her prime, in that she's still good. She's able to fight Zahir reasonably well, fight Minghua reasonably well, but she was kind of defeated both times, and I don't think she really is specialized in combat as good as she is. Like Eska and Desna, I think she is a character who beats the majority of random benders, in that she is a notable character, and so she is skilled and is within, the top 5% of benders, but falls a little bit short compared to who else is on the list. So we'll note her here and we'll move on. If we're talking about best healers, she's probably right up there though. So that's that. Then I think in terms of like the next kind of character to drop off, I think it's Tonraq. Korra's father drops off because I don't think he quite has the like unique skills of other characters, and I don't think he quite stands out as a master waterbender on the level of say like a PACU. To me, he emphasizes his strength, power, and athleticism a little too much. And maybe doesn't have enough room for some of the more philosophical aspects of waterbending and the styles of it. He tends to be a little bit more brute force, which again makes him powerful against random benders who maybe aren't particularly notable, and that makes him very skilled. But I don't think he stacks up particularly well against a lot of the other waterbenders that we have left on the list. And I don't think he really comes into play in terms of our top 20 in the end. I think the characters that are left here, the last 7 that we have here, are characters I'm going to keep in mind for the final top 20 list. I think I'm putting a line in the sand here that anyone else after this point could potentially make the top 20 list. I'm not going to say they will all make the list, but I think they are worth considering because they are all skilled, very, very heavily skilled in some way or another. So we'll start to create our top list here for waterbending. So in this case, I actually think it is the easiest thing to do is to fill the first 3 slots. And if any of you have seen some of my videos before where I discuss bending and what I think are the most powerful forms of bending, you'll probably know what the number 1, 2, and 3 are going to be. And that is number 3, Tarlok. Number 2, Yakone. And number 1, Amon Noatok. The reason for that is because this is the psychic bloodbending / bending without the need of the full moon family. This is a technique that they all have, though Tarlok isn't technically a psychic bloodbender because he has to use his hands constantly when he does it, but bloodbending without the use of the full moon is so powerful. I'm not going to go fully into how powerful I think it is. I'll leave that more towards the kind of last video of the series where we're properly sorting out the top benders overall. But just know that I will talk much more in depth about this technique. For now, just know that I consider it so powerful that I think these characters instantly get the top 3 spots on the waterbending list. The reason I placed the order for them is because, as I said, Tarlok can't psychic bloodbend. He has to use his hands to apply his bloodbending with the full moons, whereas Yakone and Noatok can both use psychic bloodbending in terms of just looking at someone, concentrating and activating bloodbending and controlling them with their mind, and that is exceptionally powerful. The reason I placed Noatok ahead of Yakone is because to me Noatok seems like a little bit more of an all-round waterbender, rather than Yukon, who seems to, I think, almost exclusively emphasizes bloodbending. In that, if you kind of if you restricted them from not being able to use their psychic bloodbending, I think Amon is the more naturally skilled normal waterbender. I think he's more agile. I think he's more evidence of actually using those techniques to his advantage, and that's why I placed them the way they are. And I don't really think there's a lot to be kind of said for trying to argue any other way about like why Yukon should be number 1 versus Tarlok. Yukon in the courtroom taking bloodbending everyone that he did was very impressive, but I think Noah Talk is that impressive, but more so as well. So that leaves Unalak, Katara, Minghua, and PACU to fight for the 4, 5, 6, and 7 slots. So how do we do this? I think Katara gets the number 4 spot as the kind of best waterbender who doesn't have psychic bloodbending. And with her, I want to keep in mind this. The reason I didn't put Hama on this list at all is because normal bloodbending, where you have to wait for the full moon, I'm not rating particularly highly, because you then have to assume that the fight will take place when the full moon is out and the characters can use that technique. And because that is not something that you can guarantee to happen, I don't think it's something you can really keep into mind all that much. It's one of those techniques where if a character can bloodbend, it makes them slightly higher up the list than characters who are maybe more powerful but don't have bloodbending. And then if the bloodbending isn't active, they maybe fall down because their other techniques outside of bloodbending aren't as powerful. And to me, that's Hama. Hama will probably be on this list at like number maybe 5 or 6 if bloodbending was a thing, because she is one of the few characters we know who can bloodbend. But without it, I think she kind of falls off the list pretty quickly, as skilled as she actually is. With Katara, I actually put her here not accounting bloodbending at all, because I don't think it's a technique she would ever properly use. I think she used it in the Southern Raiders because of the emotional situation of trying to find out what happened to her mother, the details. But I don't think she would ever, in her right mind, actually purposefully use that technique again. I rate her as number 4 because I think she just is objectively the most skilled kind of normal waterbender who doesn't have a special technique, because I think we just saw her training so much. She knows Northern style because she learned from PACU. She knows Southern style because she learned it from I suppose to some degree from herself and also from Hama. She knows about Foggy Swamp style, and I suppose learning how to kind of control vines and stuff like that, she can do that if she needs to. And she knows all the techniques that Hama knows about kind of a waterbender being able to survive in an area where there's not much water, plus little things she's developed by herself along the way, using her sweat to her advantage, and now she knows how to draw water out of plants and so on. So to me, there's just so much detail around how Katara knows all these different styles, knows of bloodbending if she absolutely needs to do that. If she absolutely needs to do that, she knows about bloodbending and what it is and potentially some ways to counter it, but I don't think she's powerful enough to counter psychic bloodbending. She knows healing, which, she can use, I suppose, in a combat scenario. She could get a second to roughly heal herself if that came into play, so that's another thing that she has. And then, just in general, has the ability to, counter stuff like not having a lot of water around by using water to her advantage, whether that be getting it from grass, plants and so on, if she absolutely needs to. Now, so that leaves PACU, Minghua and Unalak left for the remaining spots. So I think Minghua goes in at number 7 because while I think she's powerful, when you're comparing her versus other waterbenders, I find it a little bit difficult and tricky to kind of fully think about how that matchup works. I think she is a level above Kaeya in terms of combat abilities, which is why she was able to defeat her. But I think other masters who are better than Kaeya would be able to counter her unique techniques and potentially manipulate the water within her arms. And that's why I think like Katara other characters like Unalaq and even PACU, I think they would be able to actually make it so that her lack of arms would be a disadvantage to her, and it would give them the victory over her. I think against most other characters who she does have a kind of power advantage over, her unique style with those water arms is just so good. Her connection to the element is so strong. She has such unique techniques that she has an advantage, and she's brutal. She's willing to do dangerous attacks to really hurt people. She deserves her spot in this list as number 7 in consideration for the top 20 list at the end. But I don't think she matches up well against these other characters. Number 6 is PACU. In that he just represents to me the solid master. He doesn't have any like overly special, unique techniques to himself, but is just so good at normal waterbending and so experienced, part of the Order of White Lotus, so he knows exactly all about the different strengths and weaknesses of other elements, has combat experience, leadership experience, knows how to teach people. There's just so much experience within this character that I feel that he is skilled enough to be able to tackle pretty much the best of the best characters, and I think he absolutely deserves his spot on this list. I rate him below Katara because I do feel Katara has surpassed him. If not by the end of ATLA, where he's still, right there on the forefront, leading that attack against Ba Sing Se to take it back with the Order of the White Lotus. At the very least, where we are in the comics right now, where Katara is 16 going on 17, getting closer to her prime, I think now she probably has surpassed him, or at the very least will in the future. And it's one of those situations where I would say her knowledge of like other styles from traveling the world gives her slight advantages over PACU, plus I think her potential is just beyond PACU as well. So which leaves Unalaq the slot in at the number 5 slot. A lot of people underestimate Unalaq as a character, and I think also on power rankings as well. But we've seen he beat his brother relatively easy in their waterbending match against each other. I think he just has a very, very subtle, technical style of waterbending that emphasizes the philosophy, the spiritual aspects of waterbending as well. And that gives him a very good advantage against characters who are maybe a bit more aggressive, combat focused in waterbending. Like his spiritual approach, I think, does give him an advantage. Just the fact that he's so strong at waterbending that he's a waterbending master, but also can use some of the more spiritual techniques, like as far as we're aware, inventing spirit bending. And while I wouldn't say it's necessarily an important combat technique, the fact that he is a good fighter while also having that spiritual element to him as well is the same sort of elements that you would put into why like Iroh is such a powerful character, in that he's strong, he's experienced, he has all these techniques, but the spirituality and knowledge of the world adds to that. And I think it's the same with Unalaq, where in his fight against Korra, he puts up a really good fight even prior to becoming the Dark Avatar, and I think that skill just makes him so powerful. I put him below Katara because I do feel she is meant to, in the Avatar universe, represent like the best normal waterbender who doesn't have one of these kind of crazy over the top techniques like psychic bloodbending. So that's my list for waterbending. Number 1, Noatak. Number 2, Yakone. Number 3, Tarlok. Number 4, Katara. Number 5, Unalaq. Number 6, PACU. Number 7, Minghua. They're the 7 that we are considering for the final list at the end. So, we'll now move on to airbending. Now, I'm including these 2 in this video because there's not a lot of airbender characters, and not a lot of airbender characters who I think are going to be considered for the big battles at the end. As I said, we're treating the avatars separately, so Aang's not on this list. That's why Korra wasn't really mentioned on the water list. So our short list is Tenzin, Zahir, Jinora, Ikki, Gyatso, Afiko, Milo, Aang Sun Bumi, Kai, Malu, and Opal. So interesting short list. It is kind of stretching here because we don't know a ton of really, really powerful airbender characters. So the problem with airbending is actually just that because it in universe is one of those because of the story aspects of like the Last Airbender, the Air Nomad genocide, we've never seen the airbenders in their prime, and we only in Korra see them as they're making their comeback. So there's only one or two real like powerhouse airbenders. So it's going to be pretty easy here to quickly get rid of, I think, who the lower ranked characters are on the list. So I think we can get rid of Iki, Milo, Bumi, Kai, and Opal almost immediately, because they're all still in training. They're all very young. I think Milo has the potential to be an amazing airbender in the future, like really, really good with his unique style, and if he gets the physicality when he's like older in his 20s, he could be brilliant. Equally with Iki, I think she has a chance to be this interesting balance of like some of the spiritual elements of Jinora and some of the more physical kind of unique fighting styles of Milo. She could be a really nice kind of mix kind of type bender in the future, but for now I don't think they're quite on the level where they're really worth talking about here in terms of the top benders. So that's why Iki and Milo go. Bumi goes because I think he's too old. He started learning airbending a little bit too late in his life, and while he's good, like we see in like book 4, he is treated as a good enough airbender to go on like important missions like capturing Batar, but I don't feel in direct one-on-one combat he is anything to really write home about. Kai and Opal are probably like of the newer recruit airbenders, the ones that are closest in level to like a Jinora and then the top of the list, but I still feel they drop off at this point because they are not yet masters, and as good as they are and as much as they have the potential to be excellent master airbenders in the future, kind of highlighting like, wow, in a couple of years time when the new batch of airbenders has like 5-10 years of airbending experience, we're going to have a ton of really powerful airbenders. Right now, not quite like worth really talking about them on the list. Both characters are strong and powerful, but not good enough right now. Malu, in case anyone doesn't know about her, she's from the Avatar trading card game. She is basically described as one of the airbenders who survived the attacks on the temples and kind of lived on her own for a while prior to the Air Nomad genocide. She was never a master airbender, but basically thought herself through experience to become a pretty strong airbender, and she fought against the Fire Nation in the war after coming out of hiding after a couple of years. So she was never a master airbender, and I think because of that she's eliminated at this point in time. I just want to note her that she is there and thereabouts in terms of a powerful airbender. Never got her tattoos, so that's another thing. Which leaves us with our last 5. The only 5 worth in any way considering for the powerful list, but I think we'll lower it, I think, as well. So we have Afiko, Jinora, Gyatso, Zahir, and Tenzin. Immediately, I think Jinora is the weakest of the 5 left in terms of combat ability. And I say that because her speciality is, I think, more the spiritual side of airbending. Her unique technique that earns her tattoos is astral projection, which isn't a combat technique. In fact, using that technique in combat basically loses you the fight. Not to say she's not powerful at fighting, but it is not really her forte, and it's the few times we've seen her in combat, it's basically been like taking out random guards, or getting a surprise attack on someone. After that, we don't have a lot of evidence to suggest that she's like this super amazing combat genius. I note her here as being one of the more powerful benders because I think when she's a little bit older, comes more into her prime physically and stuff like that, she could be really good in combat just as well as the spiritual side of things, but I don't think that is really emphasized within her as a character. So she's number 5 on the list, but we're not really necessarily considering her for the list in the end. So, of the ones left, who are we talking about here in terms of positions 1 to 4? I think Afiko falls off at this point in time. We'll put Afiko as number 4. Now, who's Afiko, in case you don't know? Again, he comes from the trading card game. He is Afiko the Betrayer, established to effectively have been the person who betrayed the Air Nomads to give Sozin the advantage in the war. that gave basically the Fire Nation that chance to surprise attack the Air Nation, and that's why they were kind of taken out so effectively. That because he betrayed them, it gave away Air Nomad secrets, the Fire Nation were able to attack, and it not just be this kind of sacrificial thing for the Fire Nation where they sent people into the unknown and they got taken out early on. They were able to take the Air Nomads by surprise because of Afiko. And in the cards, we see he demonstrates a lot of the airbending attacks that are part of that card game. And he's established to be one of the first characters to use the airbending to suck air out of people's lungs technique that is so powerful. So he has that. He fought against firebenders when he was eventually betrayed by Sozin, because I think Sozin thought he was going to betray him like he betrayed the air nomads. The whole, the problem of someone turning to a different side is just like the new side that you're on now knows that you were willing to turn. So that whole situation happened with him. But he has his arrow tattoo, so he's a master airbender, and he's a noted master airbender because he has special techniques. So he deserves a spot in this list, but I don't think he's quite as good as the other ones that are left. Zahir is number 3. I know a lot of people will want him higher, but I just can't place him higher than this. And the reason for that is because, one, he's not a master airbender, he doesn't have arrow tattoos, he doesn't really know how to fight like an actual airbender. He has an idea because he's studied airbenders, but very clearly in his fight with like Tenzin, it's shown that he doesn't really represent all that much about what an actual airbender kind of is. He sort of fights like an airbender, but it doesn't really have the same effect as being an actual airbender. So he's not as effective as you would perhaps think. So he sort of ends up making up for that just because he's a good like martial artist. He seems pretty agile and skilled and can do the gliding pretty good. But I think almost exclusively, like the only reason I think I really place him as number 3 rather than much lower down is because he has the flying technique, the kind of rare airbending technique that you get from losing all your attachments. Even then, I don't rate this skill particularly highly, because the only real time he's used it in fighting was really against Korra in the Avatar state. And I think that is just an example of the Avatar state, Zahir's opponent, just not handling the fight all that effectively, because Korra in her weakened state by the poison obviously limits how much, like, how powerful, how quickly, how good the reaction times of the Avatar state can actually be. And then the Avatar state is just kind of relentless attack. So those two things come into play to basically just give the flying technique a good advantage, in that all Zahir has to do is dodge and then smash Korra into a wall over and over again until the fight is over. I don't think it represents an amazing offensive use of the flying technique that you can just smash people into walls by like literally spearing them in midair like he does. I think it's just a good defensive technique that basically allows Zahir to be somewhat on par with Master Airbenders, despite not being a technical airbending master and using the same style of airbending as other people. So I think if Zahir didn't have this technique, he really wouldn't be in the conversation all that much. And it's why I only placed him as number 3. I think he's really good. And like a lot of the other characters I've talked about here, like Tonrock and stuff like that, I think he can take out a lot of other kind of random airbenders quite well. And he can even, I think, handle himself against other skilled benders like Kaeya and stuff like that really well. But not the higher tier characters here. I don't think that flying technique is as big of a kind of bonus as other techniques, that it really makes him too high up. So there's that. And that's why I only place it here at number 3. And number 2 is Gyatsu. Now, the thing with him is kind of like some of the other characters that I'll discuss today and in the next few videos, is we don't know a ton about how he actually fights, but we actually know a little bit more than you may think. I think a lot of people kind of base his fighting skills purely on the fact that his body is found in the Southern Air Temple alongside a bunch of Fire Nation soldiers' bodies. And so the implication being that in his last stand, and potentially in fights all across the Southern Air Temple, he took down a ton of firebenders when the attack actually came. The airbenders were taken by surprise. They were taken by surprise by the fact that the firebenders were enhanced with the comet, but they still did a good job of defending their home. And given the amount of Sozin's comet assisted firebenders he took out, that speaks to his skill. Sure, he went down in that fight, but he still took so many people down with him. And then the cards from the Avatar trading card game, which again he showcases some of the airbending skills, highlights him fighting against firebenders and using a variety of different techniques, showing that he's a master airbender, showing his skill fighting against opponents who are like more powerful than him at that point in time with Sozin's comet, and his ability to take them on. I think he is meant to represent that kind of old master kind of character, kind of like the PACU of airbending to a degree. We don't really know if he's meant to be an Order of White Lotus member, but it's kind of implied to a degree, so we can't really say that, but he is still very powerful as an airbender, and I think that's why he deserves the number 2 spot in this list, as the kind of the PACU argument that he's just so solid, as well as like obviously training Aang to a degree and being one of the the higher monks on the kind of council of monks that leads the air nomads, the elder monks. So that speaks to the fact that he's respected within his nation enough to be basically one of their leaders, which leaves Tenzin as number 1. And I think this just has to be the case, trained very specifically one-on-one by Aang. We specifically have it mentioned as part of him growing up that he went on like one-on-one training trips with Aang all the time. And Aang, I think, would have been very, very dedicated to making sure that Tenzin had everything he needed to be the maximum airbender that he could be. As well as that, just the idea that effectively his entire life is just kind of devoted to continuing air nomad culture on, whether that be through learning the culture, learning the techniques of airbending, and then when he has his own family, training his own children. So he learns, I suppose, to some degree a little bit more about airbending through teaching other people, plus what them teaching him and so on, Korra teaching him as well as he progresses. So he becomes actually more powerful actually within the series. And I think it may seem like he's a little old at like 50 going on to like his kind of mid 50s as the series progresses, but it's almost like a perfect age because he's not so old that he can't be super agile, but he's experienced enough that he is really, really strong in combat. As we see, he's excellent. He's one of the few characters to get a hit in on Amon prior to the end of the series, able to defeat Zahir in combat, admittedly prior to Zahir getting the ability of flying, but still a very strong victory. Look how resilient he was in that fight. Even when the other Red Lotus members were getting involved, he was still willing to fight up against like 2-3 of them, and it was only when they all really got involved that he was fully taken out. And then he was still, ready to go even after the beating he took to a degree. It was kind of pretty impressive in that sense, and just little moments like the fact that his key airbending technique is that kind of air cycle thing that he makes, which is like the next level of the air scooter. It's really impressive how skilled he is. Tenzin, to me, more represents what a master airbender is than Aang, because Aang is so young in ATLA that I don't think his bending power is on the level that it would be at if Aang was more towards like 2025. I think Tenzin is that his bending in Korra is actually more powerful than most of Aang's in ATLA. Not to say that Tenzin's better than Aang. I think that Aang in his prime is much better than Tenzin. It's just that we happen to not see Aang at his prime. I think we're approaching that point in the time, like when Aang in the comics right now, I think is really powerful. And I just think it's going to take for Aang being in his mid-20s to really reach the level of like seeing his bending become more powerful, because he physically is a more kind of powerful person, being bigger, being fully grown, and so on. So I think that comes into play a little bit here, but the avatars we're treating separately. I just want to use that as an example with Tenzin, that there are more powerful kind of benders, but Tenzin is amazingly powerful, and he gets the number 1 airbender slot on our list for this time out. So they're the 2 elements I'm going to be tackling today, water and air. Next week's video, I'm going to be tackling earth, and then we'll do fire. And then, as I said, in the 4th video of this series, we will compile the list together in the end, combine everything together, and we'll get our probably top 20 overall benders in the end list. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on my ranking of the airbenders and waterbenders so far, and I suppose give your predictions for who you expect me to rank as my top firebenders, my top earthbenders, as well as who you think will end up taking the top spots on the list. And of course, let me know if there are any airbenders and waterbenders that I haven't included here that I should have included. But that has been the video for this week. In the links in the description to my Twitter, Tumblr, if you want to follow me on social media. Also links in the description to my Patreon campaign and my PayPal donation link if you want to support my channel. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.